Atheist Nomads, episode 242.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to another episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin. Joining me is Lauren.
Hello.
And our special guest today, Emma Arnold.
Hi.
Who you have actually all heard about many times because Mikey loves talking about Emma.
Aw.
Oh, yeah.
That's very sweet.
You're number one fan.
Oh. I have a number 2 fan in my lap right now.
Yes.
And of course, we have little baby Kylie
Yay.
being adorable.
Being super adorable. Oh, she just got sad. She's like, don't tell me who I am. Don't tell me.
You don't know me. Anyway, yes, you're going to hear lots of Kylie in the background. She's become talkative.
Yeah, she's talking up a storm right now. She's just a little chatty. We're just talking. A little chatty Kathy.
Oh, yeah, that's a good girl.
All right, Emma, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a comedian. I live here in Boise, and I tour every other week, pretty much internationally. But honestly, that's just Mexico and Canada, and I like to add that on.
Oh my God, no, that is so you should put that on a shirt.
Internationally.
I travel internationally.
Yeah. Sometimes
with
people,
a little star, Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, which is a little I've been to Cancun and also Toronto and Montreal, so and Winnipeg, of course.
Hey, that's
nice.
awesome.
But yeah, and I'm a beekeeper, and I have 3 kids, and I grew up here.
You're a beekeeper?
I am a beekeeper.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's what Sherlock Holmes is going to be when he retired.
Yes, yeah. It's I'm 3rd generation.
Oh my
not to
gosh.
brag, but yeah, my stepdad was a beekeeper and his dad was a beekeeper, so we were kind of raised with it, and just kind of it started as a hobby, and then we went big time for a while, and then bees are actually really hard to keep alive right now, so we are down to about 5 hives right now. So yeah.
Did you hear about the one kid that went and destroyed
Yes. A lot of people sent me that article, actually. People are always sending me bee related stuff, obviously, but
that's because bees are awesome.
They're the best. Literally, I have to tell people just stop me when you're done talking about bees, because I'll just talk about them forever. I'll go on and on. So I'll be like, when you're done, you let me know. You tap out and be like, nope, that was enough bees. That was it. You did your 15 and now you're done.
That's awesome.
Because I get really fired up and excited about them. So
it's kind of almost a political issue now. So
yeah, it absolutely is.
They are kind of critical to us being able to eat.
Yeah, 40% of our food, is bee pollen. Like I said, I could start. I was the Treasure Valley beekeeper education outreach person for a number of years.
Really?
So I taught a lot of classes and I did a lot of activism stuff. And I belonged to the Idaho Honeykeepers Association, so I did some lobbyist stuff with them. So
cool.
Yeah,
that's a whole facet that I had no idea.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising. People are like, I thought you were a comedian. I'm like,
It's have you tried paying bills as a comedian?
Yeah. Or a beekeeper.
It doesn't
Definitely.
work.
Both of them are better as hobbies.
Yeah.
Those things.
Yeah.
How was the crowd at your show in Montreal?
Oh, they were wonderful. Montreal is one of my favorite cities to perform in. They're so fun. I feel like Montreal is one of those places that it gets a bad rap. People are like, oh, the people are so unfriendly. You hear that they're snotty there, but they're not. They're super warm, and I love the city. It's falling apart in the most beautiful. There's so much corruption, and the people have such a good sense of humor. It's Canada in general is it's just my favorite. Toronto and Montreal are so fun to perform in.
God, I would love to visit.
Yeah, I've been to Toronto and Montreal. I've been to Montreal twice, and yeah, it's an amazing city.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Putin on the Ritz.
Yeah, it's so it's so beautiful, and I feel like the people have sort of a very particular in Quebec a very particular sense of humor. They really like dark stuff, and they'll kind of go anywhere with you.
Okay,
which is
fun as
not
a comedian.
True. Yeah, you can take them down any road, and they're like. They're willing to laugh at stuff that in a lot of places people are like, but that's sad. And you're like, is it?
Yeah. And one of the nice things in Montreal is everybody speaks English, and a decent proportion of the population actually prefers to speak English over French.
Yeah.
You get 20 miles out of town, and you're lucky if you can find somebody that will speak English.
Yeah. And they get kind of annoyed with you a lot of times. Even at a few places in Montreal, we went to a hot dog place and they were trying to get me to order in French, and I was like, hot dog. Like there's like 2 things on the menu. I'm like, I just want a hot dog with whatever you put like I respect a hot dog culture wherever I am. What you put on your hot dog, that's what I'll eat on my hot dog.
That's a thing. And people will, I mean, they'll go to, there's a reason why there's a Chicago hot dog and a New York hot dog and Arizona hot dogs.
Did they
peppers and
did they do cheese curds and gravy on it?
Yeah. And
oh my god,
amazing!
Like a poutine hot dog.
It's a poutine hot dog.
Oh my god,
amazing! Yeah,
I know what we're doing tonight for dinner.
Hot dogs are my favorite food. I realize that's not a really classy stance to take, but they are 100%.
Own that.
100% my favorite food. I invented something recently. Nobody steal this. This is mine. Oh. She's sad that I'm trailer trash.
Oh, we love hot dogs, baby. You're gonna love hot dogs.
You're gonna love hot dogs. She's
yeah. Hot dogs and mac and cheese.
It's just processed meat. Oh.
Yeah, let me grab her.
Oh, I'm sorry. I made you sad. I invented this. Obviously, I've been smoking a little pot recently. I had never did before, but I've been smoking a little bit in only with places where it's legal. And while I was stoned, I invented a hot dog. You take a hot dog and you fry it, and then you put that hot dog, cut another hot dog open, put that hot dog inside that hot dog, then put both hot dogs inside of a bun, then batter that, fry it, put a stick in it, and it's a double dog.
Oh my god, it's hot dog inception.
Yeah. I'm going to open this store called Double Dogs, and it's going to have 2 little dogs barking at each other.
Do it.
It's a pretty genius idea.
With honey on the side.
Yeah, with a little
honey mustard.
dippers. Yeah. Actually, honey and corn dogs would probably be pretty good together. That'll be my thing. That'll be the Idaho hot dog. That'll be our, like, people when they visit, you have to eat the Idaho hot dog. Genius.
Man. But yeah, smoking pot where it's legal. Now, 3 out of the 6 states bordering Idaho, it's legal.
Yeah. I smoked pot a little bit as a teenager, but then I didn't for a really long time. And then I have really severe insomnia, and I hadn't been sleeping for like the last 2 years. I've been sleeping like an hour or 2 a night sometimes.
Oh, that's terrible.
And I was just desperate this summer, and somebody was like, you should try smoking pot. It'll help a lot. And I was down in Denver with the guys who basically helped legalize weed in Colorado, where I was hanging out with them, and they were like, well, look, you should really try this. And I was like, you know what? I'm desperate enough. Like, I'll try anything. And I took an edible and slept like 10 hours and was like, gosh, what is this magic?
Yeah. I know. My dad apparently has been an insomniac his whole life. He fidgets and stuff. And there's been a couple times that we've helped him out.
Yeah.
And, like, how are you not doing this every night? Because you need it.
I still like, I don't really smoke it a lot. Like I actually don't enjoy the sensation of being high very much. Like I get real
I get you
itchy. Like all I can do the whole time that I'm stoned is feel my bra. That's all I'm thinking about is how uncomfortable my bra is, and I'm like frantic. And then as soon as I take my bra off, then it's like my shirt, and then I'm like, oh, fabric. Why are we always wearing fabric?
And
like,
Emma's naked. Okay.
Emma's naked again.
Party
now it's
started.
Weird. All right. So yeah. So I don't really enjoy the sensation, but every once in a while I'll smoke a little bit before bed or take a bath and then sleep like a baby. It's wonderful. It's pretty magic.
All right. And do you have any background in religion?
So my father's family, it was like Pentecostal-ish, but we only went to church a few times.
Jack Pentecostal.
like northern Idaho. I went to church a few times with that. I got sort of kicked out of Sunday school as a young girl because they were talking about how on the Lord's Day you shouldn't do anything and not even play basketball. And I really got hyper fixated on the fact that God would be upset with you for playing basketball on a Sunday. Like I just kept raising my hand and being like, right? I just have a lot more questions about that. And it was not a church where you asked questions. And so they kind of told my mom, like, look, I've always been a type A, like, bossy bitch. And so I went in and started reorganizing the Sunday school room because I was like, well, this is a disaster. Your toy setup here is not working for me. So I think they were just like, this child is a problem.
So the moment you showed up with a box of binders, they're like, done.
All right, this nerd. I brought highlighters for everybody. Let's sit down here and sort this out. And then later, my family is like, they're super liberal and not religious. Like we were mostly atheists, but kind of also like hippie crystals, you know, like I grew up with a lot of like new agey bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like sweat lodge in the backyard type bullshit, but also not really any faith surrounding it. Just sort of like, you know, witchy shit that didn't have a lot attached to it. And then because I grew up here, I grew up essentially Mormon. Like, I wasn't Mormon, but all my friends were Mormon. I went to Mormon church all the time because I wanted to have friends and fit in. And I converted for a couple years when I was like 10.
Aww.
Just because I was like, you know, well, for one thing, because they had amazing potlucks, and I was a hippie kid. Like, we weren't even
potatoes.
Oh my God. All the shit they can do with Jell-O, it's a reason enough to convert, in my opinion. But we didn't even have white sugar in my house, and then I would go to these Mormon potlucks, and I would be like, yeah, no, this is the religion for me. And then at some point, I started kind of like listening during Sunday school to what they were saying, and I was like, oh, you guys are not super into women. And I was being raised by essentially all women, like on a lesbian commune, and I was kind of like, oh, this whole thing where you can't get into heaven without your husband giving you approval doesn't fit. So then I just dated a lot of Mormon guys, and that was sort of my peripheral attachment to Mormonism, is keeping a bunch of boys out of the temple for a lot of years. But past that, no. And then I was an atheist for a long time. I don't know that I would define myself that as like strongly atheist anymore, because I kind of, I'm in the 12-step program, and they do the whole higher power shit, which I don't have a ton of attachment to, because I always feel like pretty much anything can be your higher power. For me, for a lot of years, it was just the community, the group, because I didn't believe in God. But since then, I had a relapse, and like had a really rough couple of years, and or like year, I guess. And since then, I've kind of just was like, you know what? A lot of the witchy shit from when I was a kid is like really comforting. Like, I always had a really big chip on my shoulder about that stuff because I grew up with it. So I was like, I'm not putting your stupid crystals around my bed or horoscopes or stuff like that. I always had like a really hard time with it. But I feel like in recent times, I've just been like, what if you believe in a little of everything and nothing at the same time? So like, I'm like, sure, you know what? I'll do a little praying to Kali.
Have you been to the Unitarians?
I have. Actually, I was a UU for years. I was actually, my kids and I went to the Unitarian church.
I was raised there.
I love the UUs.
So like, I went to this place nearby, Shangri-La Tea House, and they had musicians there, and they were very folksy. I'm like, I was having flashbacks. I was like, oh man, it's UU all over again. I love the UUs. And that's, when we went, I love that every week they had a different speaker from a different religion or different background or different faith. And that's kind of where I'm at religiously or spiritually, I suppose, right now, is I believe in nothing and a little of everything. Just like I'm doing, like I burned some sage in my house. I don't believe in it, but I also need something to do. I totally get that.
Yeah. And if you pull it off right, it won't create cognitive dissonance. Yeah. And then you'll be fine.
Yeah. I think that because for me, it doesn't, it's not there's a lot of ritual surrounding religion that I think can be very comforting, even if you don't believe in it. And that's sort of what I realized a lot of my life was. There's a lot of ritual around my addiction, as addictions are. Like, you usually have a lot of things you do around that. And so I was like, what if you had a lot of ritual that, like, every morning I wake up and I journal and I meditate for 20 minutes, and I do like I pray, but it's kind of like, to the universe, just sort of this like putting it out there, being grateful for what I have. And so I've tried to create ritual that is sort of like agnostic-ish, and is a little of everything. Like, sometimes I pray to the Virgin of Guadalupe. Sometimes I pray to Kali. Sometimes I pray to nothingness. Sometimes I just try to like vary it up, because I'm too rational to genuinely believe in anything. So I just kind of just let a little of it in here and there.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting thing when you go around to some different religious groups, is like Episcopalians are, for the most part, nominally Christian. They do it for the tradition. Yeah. What the creepiest thing to me the one time I went to a UU service was...
Describe it as creepy.
Tradition for the sake of tradition. It seemed very, to me, because it didn't have any meaning to me, it was meaningless. Because I couldn't find anything that it derived meaning from. But if you have those traditions, then that is the meaning for those traditions.
Yeah, like at this point, I can pretty much guarantee you that Kylie and I will probably start going to UU, because that's what I grew up with. I grew up with going, sending the kids off to learn about all different religions, staying for coffee and donuts afterwards.
The community is really nice. You know, we moved around a lot when my kids were little, and I always joined a UU church wherever we went, just to have some people, because a lot of times I knew we were only going to be there for 3 or 6 months. So I would join, but it was like a way to just like have my kids around people, and it's such a positive environment. I don't know. I guess the churches I went to didn't have a lot of ritual. Like it was kind of just like coffee and donuts before. And, there wasn't a lot of stand, kneel, incense. Now we kneel again.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of that. I just really appreciated that it was a place where I feel the same way about 12-step programs. It's like a place where people are trying to think about their bullshit in a room together, and I feel like there's not a lot of places. Most churches are not like that. Most churches are places that people are practicing sort of meaningless tradition and not thinking about it. But I think when you get into a room of people who are like actually there because they're like, what if we tried to better ourselves as human beings? Like that's
right. Like there's a new concept.
And donuts. Like if you do that, if you have a room with coffee and donuts and people bettering themselves.
I also recognize it as it's probably going to be very important for one day a week for Dustin to have some time to himself. I always wondered why my dad never went with us. He's an atheist. He doesn't care. He doesn't believe in that stuff. But why didn't he, want to be part of this community? And then I'm like, no, this was his like time to be away from us. Yeah. And
2 hours to himself was probably
that
heaven.
Was great.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll be back with news. Atheist Nomads is proudly brought to you by listeners just like you. You can find out how you can become a patron at patreon.com/atheistnomads. That's patreon.com/atheistnomads. An Italian male escort gave the Archdiocese of Naples a 1,200-page dossier identifying 34 priests and 6 seminarians who he knows to be, quote, actively gay. The document included explicit WhatsApp messages, photos, like very explicit photos, and other evidence of these men of the cloth getting it on with other adult men. In response to the gravity of the situation, the Archbishop sent the document on to the Vatican, since, as we all know, priests aren't allowed to have sex with consenting adults.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. Adults. I mean, God.
Yeah.
I've wondered with that, after reading that, I was thinking, like, how long do you think it'll take before finally the Catholic Church is like, you know what, just, you guys can bang. It's fine. Like, I just
don't
feel,
touch the kids.
Because I feel like it's fallen so far out of favor, and like nobody was ever really doing it to begin with. Nobody was sticking with it. Mm-hmm. But like, they're kind of one of the only religions left that still sticks with the celibacy thing. And
they didn't used to, did they?
It's about 1,000 years old.
Okay, that's a pretty long time.
Because they'd always had the concept of the ideal of celibacy, because according to Christian tradition, Peter and Paul were both celibate, and Jesus was celibate. Peter, according to the Bible, did have a wife, but they believe he left his wife to be with God, and so they try to follow in that tradition.
Emma are both shaking our heads. We're like, nah.
Yeah.
But that was something that came later, and it, even around the time of the Crusades, there were popes who had mistresses and children living with them. Mm-hmm. By that time, the only issue was they didn't want bishops having heirs. So it wasn't that you had to be celibate, it was just that you couldn't get married. And I think it was probably had something to do with like Victorian era, not Puritanism, but prudishness. That probably weighed in quite a bit on it.
Well, they never heard of doing it in the butt?
Well, as long as you're not telling anyone, it's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it'll be an interesting transition to watch over the course of, probably the next 100 years, because I feel like something that's maybe sort of slowly happening in our society, which will improve everything, is the idea that like part of being a spiritual being is sex, is having like that sex can be holy and sex can actually be a part of your spiritual practice. And to make it so that the only way you can have like a relationship with God is to be celibate, I feel like that's falling very out of style.
Yeah, that's like curing a headache with leeches. We'll look back on it and say that was kind of dumb.
Yeah, like in 1,000 years, they'll be like, man, that was a weird thing they did back then.
Well, and one of the things that's kind of bizarre is it really ties to asceticism, the belief that you need to punish yourself.
Oh yeah,
for your sins, for God to love you.
Yeah.
Well, the most famous classical ascetic was Origen, who actually castrated himself.
Wow.
And he was condemned by the church and thrown out as a heretic because he castrated himself. Because you have to live with the desire for it to actually be punishing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's true. You kind of took a shortcut, so to speak.
Yeah. It's the self-flagellation thing, the idea that like the best way to show God that you worship him is to suffer, is to suffer and to live without that, like, neglecting yourself is the best. I mean, I get it. Like, I'm Swedish. Like, so like, that's like how my people show, like, oh, don't mind me. I don't have any needs. I don't need anything is how you show love to other people.
Yeah.
So I get as a relationship to God that idea as well. And of course, like obviously, there are other Eastern religions that sort of follow like, the idea that being celibate is an important way to, and I think that can be true. Actually, I just finished up 4 months of celibacy, which I do periodically, because I feel like it does give you like a refocus of that energy, and it can be actually like a very cleansing thing to do. But as a lifestyle practice that you force people into if they want to serve God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's kind of like fasting.
Yeah.
There's some people can get a lot of benefit out of it, but then there are some people who can't go 5 hours without something.
Yeah.
Those that get really grumpy.
I just can't. I think like that's part of the reason obviously I'm not the first person to say this, but it's why the Catholic Church has had so many issues with sex abuse is because you take people and you take a very natural, normal, healthy desire and you stunt it and make it shameful, and it comes out in terrible ways, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
and as I've said on the show before, when your two options are to either get married or become a priest and take a vow of celibacy, or a nun as well, if you aren't attracted to adult members of the opposite sex, then you have an easy out. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that easy out is prone to abuse. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even exposing a bunch of men in the Catholic Church as homosexuals to me seems really like, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of hypocrisy there and it should be exposed, but at the same time, it's like those guys aren't, if those guys are, I mean, I assume since they're sending Snapchat pictures to other adult men, like they're homosexuals, not pedophiles. Yeah. It's kind of like, that guy exposed however many people you said, and you're like, why, dude? Like, leave these guys alone. They're just trying to, because honestly, like probably for a long time, that was sort of if you knew in your heart 400 years ago that you were gay, the Catholic Church probably seemed like a pretty healthy place to take that, because you're like, well, I'll just be around a bunch of other dudes who are possibly gay also. So, like it seems like...
I think where this came from is this is a gay male escort in Italy.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church is still very powerful in Italy and is still oppressing him.
Yeah, that's true.
So he's trying to expose the hypocrisy of the church.
Yeah, and he should, for sure.
I think it's more interesting because of the fact that they are taking this so seriously and so public when they've never done that with pedophilia.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the pedophilia is more like that doesn't happen, sweep it under the rug kind of thing. And this is like, no, we're going to fight this. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common of a lot of societies. Like, like what you see with the Me Too movement right now is you see a lot of like, people are really willing to back up adult women. But then like when that gymnastics doctor, when a lot of that stuff came out, people are like, yeah, we don't want to talk about this. Like, and as a survivor myself, I can say like when I like tell my story, people are immediately like, yeah, that's gross. Nobody wants to hear about that. But if I talk about my like history of being harassed by adult men comedians as an adult, then people are like, oh, okay, we'll talk about that.
We'll stand behind you.
Yeah, but otherwise, it's like
share your story.
I was at a bar the other night, and I have a stitch tattoo, which is the universal symbol for survivors of child sex abuse. And this guy was like, hey, what do your tattoos mean? He's hitting on me. And I was like, oh, this is, it's a survivor tattoo. And he was like, gross. Why are you telling me that? And I'm like, well, you fucking asked. And he was just like, he was so upset with me. And I was just like,
it's like, oh, I'm sorry. Do you see me as damaged goods now?
Yeah. And he was so upset. And he just kind of kept being like, I don't know why you would tell someone that. Like, I don't even know you. Why would you tell somebody that? And I was like, why are you trying to make me feel bad? Like, I didn't.
Right. Tattoos are deeply personal things.
Yeah, you do not
have
somebody.
meaning.
Yeah. We met 8 minutes ago and you asked me what a tattoo meant and I told you, and now you're having a meltdown. You know, it's like, dude. So,
and you're writing it all down.
That,
you're like,
but
this
in
is
Italy.
good. This is good. This is going in the next set.
I do appreciate that a lot of times it keeps me from being hit on at bars, because you tell guys that and they're like, oh, okay, goodbye. It's like shut down. So that's what's happening in Italy.
Man. It's kind of like the semicolon tattoo too.
Yeah,
People
exactly.
are intimidated by it. So
yeah, exactly.
Now, one thing that is also worth noting is we're seeing it in the atheist and skeptic community right now with the response to allegations of Florence Krauss harassing and assaulting women. And the number of people who are trying to sweep it under the rug, ignore it, or try to discredit the victims, when there are numerous named victims, named sources, clearly documented.
It's hard, so interesting, because it's like, it's really easy to back up victims until someone you know and like and respect, you find out that they have done that. And which to me, I always find kind of surprising, because I'm like, who do you think is doing this? Like, it's men you know, it's men you like. Like, it's not like some, back alley dirtbag in a trench coat. Like, it's men that you like. And a lot of times it's powerful men, intelligent men who are otherwise really good people. I think I've watched that a lot in my own industry, where people are like, but I like him. And I'm like, yeah, that's heartbreak of it.
You got to reconcile that.
I also feel like there needs to be room. And I've gotten some flack for this, but I feel like there needs to be room for the fact that, like, men who have done this are operating in a system where it has been okay for a long time to harass women. And so, like, I had a lot of respect recently. There was a comedian who came forward who was like, hey, I harassed a bunch of women about 10 years ago when I was drinking, and here's what I did. I've made amends with them. I want to make it public so that way people don't feel like it's a secret. And I have a lot of respect for someone who recognizes their behavior, acknowledges it, apologizes, and fixes it. I don't have respect for someone who just continues to deny it because it's too heavy of a truth to accept about yourself. Like, we've all done ugly shit. And so if you've harassed a woman, just own that and accept it and go make an amends for that and talk to that and fix it. For God's sakes, fix it. So people who are like, who are pushing back on the victims and like doubting it and stuff, I feel like a lot of times those are men who know that they have done those things and who do not want to accept like that behavior, because it's kind of like being racist. Like, we're like, I'm a white girl from Idaho. I've absolutely been racist in my life. I've absolutely done something stupid and asinine that some poor person of color was like, oh my God, Jesus Christ, what? And I feel and I feel like if you can just accept that and just be wrong and just be like, I was wrong before, I'm fixing it now. Like, that's what we need to happen with sexual harassment right now, is for men to be able to admit to being wrong.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've definitely noticed is the people that have been brought down as part of Me Too, the ones where they're bringing up stuff from 15, 20 years ago, there's also stuff getting brought up from last year.
Yes.
Or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Where, if you've been...
Anybody who's been to a convention.
If you've been on the internet since 2012, at a minimum, that was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of times you have someone who knew that was behavior was wrong, but could get away with it. Up until recently, you could just get away with it. Like, it was kind of accepted. Like, in my industry, when you would tell a booker, like, hey, this guy just grabbed my boob in the back room, they'll be like, well, kind of a job hazard for you. Like, it was just accepted that was the world for women, and that was acceptable. And I think that has really shifted in the last year, which is a weird benefit of Trump, because I feel like he brought this boil to a head
the women's
of women.
March,
Women just being like, this is not an acceptable world to live in, which for years we've kind of just been like, well, that's how it is. And I think all of a sudden you have women who are just like, this is not a way to live. This is
not okay. We cannot elect these people president.
And I feel like too, you're finally having men who, because Trump's behavior is so over the top horrible, you're having men who are finally starting to examine their own behavior and be like, when the locker room talk conversation was happening, I think a lot of men had to be like, I've talked about women like that. I've let my friends talk about women like that. And it kind of started to be not okay. I always tell men, because a lot of times men will be like, I'm not sexist. I'm not sexist. I'm not sexist. And I'll get in arguments and I'll be like, why do you think you're better than the system that made you? Like, why do you think you're the one fucking person who got to escape the system? Like, you're part of the patriarchy. I'm sexist. We're all part of the patriarchy. We're all keeping women down without meaning to. And I feel like just the being able to just be like, yeah, I've done some shit that Trump has done, like, is a huge movement forward for men. Yeah.
Well, I definitely equate it closer to the, racism, where the healthiest thing you can do is admit that you're racist, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And then look into how do you fix that?
Yeah.
Going forward.
Instead of just being like, I'm not. Like, I feel like the defensiveness...
Not all people.
Yeah. Just the defensiveness stops the conversation.
The defensiveness
if you're defensive, there's nothing else to talk about.
Well, and one of the things that's been interesting with social media, especially in the last couple of years, is men have been sexually harassing and sexually assaulting women since before we had words to describe those things.
Yeah.
And cops have been killing black people for as long as there have been cops. But with social media, people who historically have not had voices now do.
Yeah, and I feel like for me, as a cis white woman, like I hate Twitter. I fucking hate it, and it makes me crazy, and it breaks my heart, and people are so awful on there. But at the same time, I feel like in the last 3 years, I've gotten so educated on shit that I did not know was a problem. And constantly, like, I try to follow a really broad spectrum of people, because I feel like being able to be exposed to other people's experiences and voices has created so much empathy for, I feel like Twitter has been huge for that, for people being like, oh, wait a minute. Like, like I said, I grew up here in Idaho. So like when I first started like reading about the Black Lives Matter stuff, I was kind of like, I mean, you feel like a real dick because you are, because I was like, oh, I didn't know that this was such a big deal, because I grew up in this like tiny little bubble, of like,
that was all taken care of in the 60s.
Yeah, no, everything is fine now. And I totally had, when I moved to Oakland when I was 19 from Idaho, I mean, just this fresh little baby, so idealistic and stupid. And I was totally, we moved to a primarily black neighborhood in Oakland. And I was so naive and racist and shitty that I totally was like, thought like, oh, I'm just going to move in here and be friends with everybody. And this wonderful, benign, benevolent white woman am going to like, basically cure all racism by my movements of moving into Oakland and allowing these people to be around me. And looking back on it, it was like, it's just the most ridiculous, like shitty privileged white girl thing to do. It's so idealistic. But I just really was like, oh, I'm so tolerant. It's going to fix all these issues that I've read about, and
I still like that. I'll admit it.
And you see a lot of that. Like a lot of my comedian friends do a lot of material on white feminism, and I think a lot of times it's hard to hear your bullshit. Like they've said stuff, and I'm like, oh god damn it, I've done that. Like when Get Out came out, I was a little too excited about Get Out, the movie, and then I like somebody tweeted like, oh my god, white girls stop being so excited about Get Out, and I was like, oh, I'm doing that. I'm doing the white girl thing where I'm like, you guys, your movie's great. And they're like, dude, shut up. And I'm like, okay, sorry.
Calm the fuck down.
So I think at my kid's school, there's a thing on the wall that says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think that if everything could come back down to that all the time, where you're like, dude, just when someone's like, hey, you're being really offensive right now, if you can just pause and be like, okay, tell me why. Let me absorb that, instead of being like, no, I'm not. You are. I'm not offended. Like I feel
I have the right to be offended.
Yeah. I feel like just pausing and listening to people is. I'm probably naive, but I feel like that's another thing Trump has done. As divided as the country seems, you actually have a lot of people who are finally kind of like, hey, we need to listen to each other. And you see, even in really conservative places they're really open to me doing very progressive liberal comedy, and they're not shitty to me, because I feel like everybody's kind of ready for a dialogue. Everybody's kind of exhausted with hating each other. So yeah, hopefully.
All right. So here's a kind of a lighthearted one.
Okay.
With a not horrible ending. A Boise woman was trying to fly home from San Francisco when she got up from her seat, walked up to the door, and tried opening it, screaming, "I am God, I am God, I am God."
Yeah, I read that and was like, that was her first edible for sure. Like somebody gave her one and they're like, don't eat the whole thing, like a sliver of it and see how you feel, and then a little more later. And she was like, nah, it's just a piece of chocolate, and she ate the whole thing. I mean, because who hasn't felt like God on an airplane before? You know, you're just up there, you're hurtling through the sky, you're looking down, and you're like, we live on a planet. You know, you're like, I think I could very easily be that woman.
Okay. Now, other passengers got up and restrained her. She was taken into custody and to the hospital. So not to jail, since obviously she needs help.
Yeah.
But the other nice thing is, with the plane pressurized, being 30,000 feet up, she couldn't have opened the door.
Yeah.
It would have been physically impossible.
Yeah. I don't know. She's God. So, I mean, like, who are you to doubt God?
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. That's just,
I like,
insane.
I empathize with that because, like, I genuinely have, I have these moments, like, I feel like the difference between being, like, I consider myself, like, I'm mentally ill. I've been not diagnosed with mental illness, but I feel like the difference between being, like, hospitalized and just being walking around on the street mentally ill is just whether or not you engage in that moment. You know, whether or not, like, I've been at the grocery store and been like, I wonder how many pickle jars I could push off the shelf before they arrested me. Like, what if I just started pushing pickle jars off the shelf and just stood here making eye contact with whoever comes down the aisle, just pushing pickle jars off? Like 40? Do you think I could get 40? I'm white. I feel like I could get 40 pickle jars in before somebody tackled me. And those are the things, like,
okay.
if you start actually pushing pickle jars, then you've gone into hospitalization. But like, I've for sure been on a plane and been like, man, what if I just got up and started yelling that I'm God and opened a door? Like, well, that'd be crazy, right? That'd be amazing. So this lady, she just took it. You know what? She's a real risk taker. She just took it further than I've had the balls to do ever.
Oh, man. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare has been automatically rejecting any and all requests by trans people to update the sex on their birth certificates because they interpret the law, which they actually admit is unfair, to refer to sex, not gender, and that it only allows for corrections if there was an error at the time of birth.
That is so obnoxious.
Yeah.
It's infuriating.
So, of course, 2 trans people sued.
Yeah.
And U.S. District Judge Candy Dale ruled that this is a discriminatory violation of the 14th Amendment, and the state has to at least consider the applications.
This is one of those times where you're like, okay, so like, you know, Barbara, who's working down there, gets an application in that's like, this person wants to switch the sex on their birth certificate. Like, how shitty and petty is Barbara that she gives a shit? You know, like, to take a stand on that, to not just be like, this affects me in no way. You know, I'm standing here stamping shit either way.
It's paperwork.
That's
all it is.
It's paperwork. It means literally nothing to her and so much to someone. It's absolutely just a way to punish trans people and to be a petty shithead. Yeah.
And, you know, it's shitty bureaucrats get to take advantage of shitty laws, or in a lot of cases, just outdated language in laws. You know, the Idaho state birth certificate laws are generally, because I've read up on them recently, generally speaking, they seem to have been written by people who are relatively progressive, but they're written for getting filled out at the hospital with a baby. They weren't written for adults to do anything. You know, like, you have up until the kid's a year old to get make any changes on the name. Otherwise, you have to get a court order. And the laws are very much written for, once the baby's a year, they'll take court action to do anything.
Well, I mean, look at what the thing that you're stamping is a birth certificate, not what are you in 20 years certificate. They didn't think, maybe they just didn't think it would ever be a big deal.
Well, of course. I mean,
yeah.
But now that you're actually arguing for the rights of people, now it's a big deal. And that is why things such as these constitution and laws, and you can go back and rewrite them because society continues to progress.
Yeah. I think the trans issue is one of those things. Part of the reason people get so fixated on it is because, like, it's really hard to be a person. You know, it's hard to to come up with a sense of self and decide who you are. And being male or female for some people is like, that's their entire identity. Like that is it. And that has defined them. Like, boys like this, boys like football. I'm a boy. And so when you start being like, hey man, maybe those lines are a little wobbly. Those people, Barbara, she's freaking out because she's like, if I'm not a woman, then what the fuck am I? And you know, then you get into some real Buddhist shit.
Yeah, I've had a lot of personal feelings about it because you know, and I'm not even a person of color. I'm just a white woman. How dare some guy who grew up with man privilege suddenly claim to be a woman? And you know, I don't know. I haven't take that credit, get to wear that tiara. I don't know what I had a sense of resentment for that for a while, and I'm totally getting past that because it's just like, wow, some people just want to be people. Trans
friends that and I do a lot of like trans activism, that I think that any trans woman I know who was born biologically male never got to entirely live with the privilege of a regular you know biological male because they felt different or you know never felt comfortable. They didn't ever a lot of times didn't actually get to have a lot of that privilege. And also I just can't imagine just living with that struggle all the time, living in the wrong gender. Like it must just be,
and that's something that I've had to come to terms with personally. It's just, you know, everybody has their struggle. You can't be defensive or offended by somebody else's struggle when you're comparing apples to oranges.
Well, and one of the I would say the simplest thing about male privilege is not struggling.
Yeah.
If you are struggling, you're missing out on that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think, you know, so if you're just a regular white guy moving through the world, like for you, that the absence of struggle is that privilege. Like you're getting to just kind of like, oh, this stuff is easy. You're having a problem with this? Really? I got a job easily. Like, I got a raise, no problem, you know? And so, yeah, if you're somebody who was born trans and you're like not getting to, I have a couple of friends who transitioned female to male and are like, oh my God, being a dude is amazing. Like you have no idea.
I've heard
it's phenomenal. And I'm like,
just a simple experiment of women signing their names differently. So that it's either gender neutral or male, and their work lives becoming 100 times easier.
Oh yeah, a lot of times for the festival when I'm corresponding with people, I will use my business partner's email or name because people respond so differently to him than they do me, and like with him they're just completely professional and they're like, what do you need? With me it's like, hi sweetie. I also like
they're trying to be personal.
I was somewhere just the other day at this show, and this guy who was working at the show, not a comedian but he was working the show, he came over and he was talking to us and he hugged all the women and then he shook all the men's hands, which seems like a really small thing, but I was kind of just like, don't fucking touch me. Like, why are you hugging me? We're not friends. We're not buds. Like, we worked on one show together. Shake my fucking hand like a professional. But all of us, he's like, bye, sweetie. So good. Like, kind of patronizing. And the dudes, he's like, really good working with you. Like, I was just kind of like, that's like a small, like, weird little privilege thing. And that's a small thing that
I think if you took him to the side and say, you know, that wasn't really cool, he'd probably be open to changing his behaviors.
Possibly, although that's one of those ones that when you're like, hey man, I noticed you hug all the women and you shake all the dudes' hands, you're like, what? I'm a hugger. I like to hug. And you're like, yeah, but it's like a gender. And they're like, sometimes people are just, they don't see it as something that's like
true. And it's like, do I feel like getting into that argument tonight?
Yeah, exactly.
No. All right, well, let's go ahead. I'm going to change the order a little bit here. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that a trans woman who was fired from her funeral home job by her boss after informing him that she is trans and was going to start transitioning, was illegally discriminated against in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. The employer's defense was that the employment decision was protected under his free exercise of religion, and the court ruled that employing a trans woman would not be a substantial burden on his sincerely held religious beliefs, and that he fired her for not living up to his gender stereotypes, which is a clear violation of the law.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
There's
Which is that's an exciting ruling, you know, like that's actually really exciting.
Yeah.
That was one of those, I mean, that's one of those ones where it seems so obvious that,
you're like,
that this was an abuse of the religious freedom rule, but dang, it still has to go to court and they
also,
still have to rule on it.
It's a funeral parlor. Like, who is this trans woman offending? You're worried that the dead are going to be like, whoa, dude in a dress, what the fuck's happening here? You know,
grieving
like
families are even going to give her a second look.
Yeah.
Because
exactly. I just felt like that was so...
What's actually really big with this is currently sexual orientation and gender identity aren't protected in most states.
Yeah. Add the words.
Right, which we've been trying to get that here in Idaho for, what is it now, 10 years?
Yeah.
And rulings like this make that irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because what the courts have started doing is they are ruling that sex discrimination, which is prohibited in Title VII, and this is based on a very slow, gradual process since 1964 when the law was passed, take and look at what does sex discrimination mean. And 70s and 80s, they were talking about this on Opening Arguments not too long ago. They found that discriminating as a woman for not dressing the way you think women should dress is discrimination, because that woman is not... The problem is that she isn't living up to your expectations of what she should look like.
Pantsuits for the win.
Yeah. And the natural progression of that is discriminating against somebody for trans status is discriminating against somebody because they aren't living up to your expectations of the gender stereotypes that you think should apply to them. That is no different than not being happy with a woman wearing a pantsuit instead of a skirt. And it would also apply to sexual orientation, because the whole problem of not liking that a man is dating a man is because that's not living up to your stereotype of what a man should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hadn't even done the math. The fact that sort of skips over the need for add the words, for that whole thing kind of just skips over it. That is really exciting.
Right.
Huh.
And it's been, there's been all these legislative pushes because courts haven't been including that. But since that's starting to move that direction, it might all become irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which would be awesome.
Yeah.
Here's to hoping.
All right, let's go ahead and take another break and then more news. We love hearing from our listeners. You can email us at contact@atheistnomads.com, tweet us @atheistnomads, send us a message on our Facebook page at facebook.com/atheistnomads, or better yet, call us and leave us a message at 541-203-0666. We might even play it on the show. You can also help us out by leaving us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcast directory of choice. Last week, we talked about the death of Kentucky's child marriage bill. Well, now Tennessee has followed suit, but for different reasons. At the request of a lawyer, the House Majority Leader, Glenn Casada, referred the bill to ban marriage under the age of 18 to summer study, which is where bills go to die. Tennessee's marriage law is actually vague enough that with a judge's order, you can get married at any age.
Oh, God.
There is nothing to say that a 6-year-old can't get married off if a judge signs off on it.
Jesus.
What?
I've lived in Tennessee, and that does not surprise me.
Yeah.
No.
So the reason that this lawyer, David Fowler, was pushing for tabling the bill is that he's planning a lawsuit to challenge the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that legalized same-sex marriage.
Oh, God.
And his theory is that the Supreme Court invalidated all marriages in the state since it struck down the state's marriage law. And by the state updating the law, they would be acknowledging same-sex marriage and make his lawsuit moot.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Honestly,
self-serving much?
That's so convoluted, I don't even really understand it.
It is kind of...
I kind of understand what he's doing, but I'm like not that I agree with it, but I'm like, wait, what? You're striking down... Okay, it doesn't make... It's one of those clusterfucks that you're just like, what are you doing?
What? This is completely frivolous. After the Loveless ruling, when the Supreme Court struck down bans on interracial marriage in states like Virginia and quite a few other states, mostly in the South, that didn't invalidate all marriage in the South.
Yeah.
It just meant you can't stop interracial couples from getting married.
Yeah.
So this is insane.
Yeah.
I kind of, what if the Supreme Court...
And that's what the first judge is going to say.
What if it goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court's like, you know what, just as a fuck you, okay, all marriages in Tennessee are, you're right. Everything, nobody's married in Tennessee, go fuck yourselves. Like, that's
good luck trying to divvy up that property.
Yeah, you guys wasted our time, and now nobody gets to be married in Tennessee. I hope you're happy,
Gavel.
lawyer.
Oh man, it is going to be kind of funny with all these attempts to kill marriage in the South, to save marriage. You know, Alabama's trying to get out of the marriage license business. A couple other states are looking at other bizarre things. It'll be really funny if the South kills marriage. If they just end up getting rid of the institution entirely, just so that gay people can't get married. They're like, ha, so there, and you can't get married anywhere in the South anymore. And then by rote they become like super like polyamorous and really cool, and everybody has like really healthy open relationships, and then the South is like fun to go to.
Yeah.
Oh,
there you go. How to fix the South.
There you go.
Wow. Sinclair is a media company that operates 173 TV stations across the country, and in recent years has become very clear that their owners are trying to push quite the right-wing agenda across the company. That includes 2 of
Boise's major outlets, too.
Oh, which ones?
Does it?
KTVB and KIVI.
Oh, wow.
I think are both Sinclair Media.
Huh.
Idaho Statesman, I believe, is Sinclair Media.
Wow.
Oh.
Huh. I did not know that.
Yeah.
They also own hundreds, if not thousands, of radio stations. I know that, too.
Wow.
So they are now requiring that their stations record scripted promos that will be 60 to 75 seconds in length. They are to air them at a high rate of frequency to maximize the number of people who see them. And they are going to be all trying to discredit the, quote, fake stories from national news outlets.
Lord. Although, I mean, who the fuck is watching TV? Like, when was the last, during the Olympics, I was like trying to remember the last time I had actually watched TV or listened to the radio. Like, these people are all 70 years old and voted for Trump anyway, who are like watching, Ellen at 4 p.m. Oh, that Ellen.
Yeah.
Ellen is on at 2 p.m.
Oh, sorry.
Newly stay-at-home mom here chirping in.
I feel like that those are almost like the death throes of a dying business model anyway. Like,
yeah.
I mean, if they were doing it on Netflix, I would be fired up. If they're like, before you could watch Queer Eye, they made you watch 75 seconds of debunking CNN. But I feel like I don't know that my kids have even ever watched television, like other than PBS when they were really little. Like,
oh yeah,
like I honestly I don't think they've ever just like been watching TV. I mean, and I don't even really know anyone other than like my parents still watch PBS because they don't have Netflix. They can't figure it out. So
wah, wah.
Yeah. So if they purchase like NPR and PBS, I'll start being like, wait a minute. But like KTV, yeah, like who's watching Channel 7 News? Who's reading the Statesman even? Like, I mean, they probably have like 60,000 people who subscribe to the Statesman at this point.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, like, honestly, I feel like a lot of people stay subscribed to the newspaper just to be polite. Like, you just, you feel bad.
You just can't say no to that guy at Fred Meyer who asks you if you want a free paper.
He's so sad. He's not selling any papers. I'll just get one.
Now, the thing that's kind of concerning here is the people who do watch the evening news are old.
Yeah.
And
getting brainwashed.
Yes, they are more likely to be. It's the same people who watch Fox News.
Yeah.
And this is just making sure that they are getting immunized against real news.
Yeah. I feel like there's a whole like a section of the baby boomers that's a lost cause anyway. Like the people, that 30% who voted for Trump. I was interacting with a guy recently he's a huge Trump supporter. He loves Trump. He thinks he's doing a great job. Like those are the people that like you're not going to change their minds anyway. Like whether or not they have that 75 seconds or not, they believe all of that news is fake news already. Like I don't feel like there's just a lot of moderate people left.
Yeah. The part I think
they're there.
They're there.
The thing I really think is insidious with this, insidious, that's not the right word.
Insidious?
Yeah, insidious is that we're going into midterms. Democrats are expected to win big in the midterms because Democrats are angry. And a lot of people are embarrassed that they voted for Trump. I think what they're trying to do is get the right wing angry so they go out and vote.
That's true. Yeah. But
Or
they're always angry. They never settle down. Like, as far as I can tell. They don't have like an off day where they're like, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good. I finally sorted out my feelings about my dad, and I don't need to watch Fox News and be furious at the Democrats today. Like they are that engaged and that angry all the fucking time.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It's a shitty thing, but it also to me is like 163 television news outlets and a bunch of radio stations. Like I have to for work do morning radio a lot. Like, you know, when I'm like headlining a place, they make me go do morning radio. And I'm always like, who the fuck is listening to, like, who is listening?
I can't stand to radio shows.
Yeah. I'm like, who's listening to some shock jock? And people will call in and I'm always like, what the fuck? Who are you? What are you doing listening to radio?
Well, it was something that I finally understand why so many people are duped into like woo and weird stuff. It's because, especially since I'm like brand new stay-at-home mom and we had to cut down on our streaming because I was streaming too much. So I started watching daytime television more just to see what was on. It's Dr. Oz, it's the doctors, it's Dr. Phil, and they're all pushing all this crap science. And I'm like, no wonder people are falling for this because they're 60 years old. They don't know better. And this is being shoveled to them as the truth.
Yeah.
They're not going to go online and double check sources or read about, you know, how dubious these claims are.
I guess I'm just waiting for a lot of people to die. Like,
but there's also the younger stay-at-home moms who also
but like
do that.
Like a lot of the young, I mean, maybe it's because I have teenagers. You know, I have teenagers, and I watch their news consumption and their friends' news consumption. Like my 9-year-old out of the blue the other day was like, "How do you know if someone is a boy or a girl?" And I was like, "Well, you know, there's like social constructs and physical features and blah blah blah." And he's like, "No, the answer is you don't. You don't ever know if someone is a boy or a girl."
Oh, you got owned.
And I was like, "Oh," and he was like, "Yeah, gender's not real." And then he walked away, and I was like, my fucking 9-year-old
snap walks away.
Came to that, and I just feel like because of the internet, they're getting a different. Like I just feel I have so much faith in young people. I just really feel like the young people I know are so much more educated than I was at that age. Like a 19-year-old compared to when I was 19 they're so different. So maybe I'm just kind of like, I don't really give a shit what these 6-year-old people are watching. Like they're not long for the world. And you have this whole generation, like people shit on millennials, but I love millennials because I feel like
I do too.
Millennials are amazing. Like the way they're educated is so different than like Generation Y. We were trash cans. We were not doing that. We were the worst.
We are the millennials.
Oh no, I'm too old to be a millennial. I think I'm 37. How old are you guys?
30.
I'm 33.
See, you guys are babies.
34.
You guys would be millennials. I think I'm right on the
very tip.
82, I think, is the current cutoff.
Yeah, I'm 80.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I'm Generation Y. We didn't do anything. We basically just kind of like hid out, and we were like, oh, we're just gonna lay low. We didn't even have Nirvana. We didn't have anything.
You didn't even have Nirvana.
We didn't even have Nirvana. You know, Generation X at least had that.
We had September 11th, and we had the internet. That made that changed that changed everything.
We had the Spice Girls and Britney Spears, and I feel like those were our contributions. And you're welcome for girl power. And that was it. We didn't really do a whole lot.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. Idaho has applied for a waiver to the Affordable Care Act that would allow the state to offer extremely limited and cheap plans. Now, this would be on the state's health insurance exchange. And the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has let Governor Butch Otter know that the ACA is still the law and the state still has to follow it.
Yeah, you can't just say, no, I'm not gonna.
You know, I've lived here most of my life. I love Idaho, but this is the shit that makes me bananas. Yeah. Where you're just like, that is just shooting yourself in the foot as a state, where you're just like, we're not going to participate in this thing that's working just to make a stand. Butch Otter.
Just to make a stand. Yeah. And it's like, let's bring back all those horrible things. It's pre-existing conditions. It's high deductible caps. It's stuff that will only make the poor suffer. And that's a good thing? No, it's not.
They don't care about the poor.
No.
Well, they don't, because all of their medical stuff is already bought and paid for by the state, so they don't have to worry.
Yeah, I feel like that will be the next big shift politically that maybe will come out of this too, is that finally maybe being poor, like it will occur to people that they are the poor.
Yeah.
Instead of, like, I feel like this ACA thing is a big example, because you heard people like a year ago being like, I don't want Obamacare. And then when they were like, well, we're repealing ACA, they're like, wait, what? I'm on that. And you're like, well, that was fucking Obamacare, dummy. Like, that's what it was. And so people were losing their insurance in Idaho. Like, people I talked to who were like, well, I didn't realize they were going to repeal my stuff. I thought it was just for poor people. That's you, bud. You're on Medicaid. You're one of the poor people.
Yeah.
And so maybe finally people will start to be like, oh,
are you living paycheck to paycheck?
No, I'm one of those.
Poor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, you can always support us on Patreon.
Oh, yes. Yay.
All right, for our final news story, Pastor Robert Jeffress is the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, a contributor on Fox News, and a member of Trump's Evangelical Advisory Board.
Which shouldn't even exist.
No, it definitely shouldn't.
Creepy.
So creepy.
Yeah, so he was asked on Fox News about the left calling evangelicals hypocrites for their continued support of Trump. This, of course, is in light of the ongoing Stormy Daniels scandal.
Which is, I mean, like, how little of a blip did that even make? Like, a porn star comes out and like...
What
like
little blip that should have made that is actually now a huge deal because news is covering it.
Yeah, but it still just feels like 10 years ago, that would have blown the country apart. Like, that's all that would have been on the news. Like, it would just been insane.
And they're like, oh,
so
look,
they're like,
a pussy that he grabbed.
I guess
he
had an affair.
Well, let's listen to what he had to say.
First of all, evangelicals knew they weren't voting for an altar boy when they voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
We supported him because of his policies and his strong leadership. But secondly, and Sandra, this is more important perhaps, evangelicals understand the concept of sin and forgiveness. Look, we are all sinners. We all need forgiveness. That forgiveness is available through Christ for anyone who asks.
I feel like you can even hear it in that woman's voice. She's like, right. Okay, this is the stretch.
Yeah, and she had to cut him off because I had to cut that down quite a bit because he went off at first just about, of course it violates the commandment to not have sex with porn stars. Okay, there is 11. No commandment to not have sex with porn stars. But okay, so this is the second in recent years known cheating douchebag president. The last one, conservatives went apeshit over, and evangelicals were absolutely livid. Now, they don't care.
Yeah.
The difference is one's Republican and one is Democrat.
I feel like it's been really sort of like cathartic in a way to watch evangelicals just burn their own house down.
Yeah.
Like with the Roy Moore shit, where you were like, oh, you guys... I knew you never stood for anything.
Yeah.
But it's great to watch you admit it so publicly. And for such a douchebag. Like, they're burning their own house down for Trump. You know, it's not someone who's an amazing leader who's making huge changes for them. Like, it's someone who you're like, this is who you burnt your house down for. So I don't know. I've kind of wondered, like, in 2 years and 4 years, where that movement will be, because it feels in a way like you're watching the death throes of something that knows it doesn't work anymore. You know, even young Christians are like
bizarre,
not anti-gay, you know, are leaning like, I think that a lot of the tenets of what made you an evangelical, have fallen so out of style and are kind of fading that like, even they have to be like, look, we don't care if people are cheating anymore. Like they get that that's like everybody's kind of moved on.
That, and I think that they are automatically going to come to the defense of just Trump in general, because he is, I wouldn't say charismatic, because he's like in an evil sort of way. He is.
Yeah.
The people who fell for him hard, and they are having to defend all of these terrible things that he's doing. So they are changing their position, actively changing their positions on stuff for his sake.
So you originally had the two groups that were backing him, people who wanted tough trade policies and Nazis.
Yeah.
Very different groups, but and then I think the third group that was initially backing him was people who wanted to watch it all burn.
Yeah.
So you had those first three groups. Then he got the nomination. So then he got the backing of a bunch of people just because he's Republican. And what is fascinating to watch is this is the moral majority coming home to roost.
Mm-hmm.
The Republican Party managed to win over the evangelicals when recruiting racists and, when that wasn't enough, they won them over by convincing them that they needed to adopt the Catholic view on abortion, and then the Catholic view on contraceptives, and the Catholic view on homosexuality, and they've decided that's what they stand for.
Yeah.
That's you can't run a country on that.
I mean, watching the Tea Party stuff, you're like, this isn't sustainable. You can't base a political party around how bullshit the government is.
Yeah.
You know, like you have a bunch of people who are angry and who have no faith in the government and who are like, let's tear it down. And then you're like, okay, we will, but also we're politicians still, so we're actually not going to do that at all. And,
right.
And so, yeah, you have. I feel like the Republican Party is bleeding people who have finally figured out, like, oh, you're just using us. Which I'm surprised that the evangelicals haven't had a stronger. I mean, I guess they have. You see other groups coming out and being like, no, we're not supporting Trump. But you have someone on Fox News who also, like, that guy's just a pundit. I feel like it's easy to feel like there are more people who support that than there actually are watching Fox News.
Right. He's on Fox News earning his paycheck.
Yeah, exactly.
And he doesn't represent squat. People who does represent are in the severe minority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why give him airtime? Because it's entertaining.
Well, it's entertaining, and he's Pastor Pundit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is fun watching the moral majority and the evangelical movement lose all semblance of having any moral higher ground.
Oh, it's so satisfying.
We just need to all make sure that we don't let them live this down.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't let them forget it.
They will. I mean, I think that's they say that you can sometimes characterize conservative people by the fact that they have the inability to change their mind, so that like with like global warming, climate change stuff, that they cannot just finally be like, oh, I guess I was wrong about that. Moving on. But then watching them do this, I'm like, well, they clearly are capable of it.
Yeah.
As long as it's completely self-serving. As long as they're able to be like, look, we don't care about adultery anymore. It's not a thing we're focusing on. And you're like, all right, okay, yeah. And I don't think they'll acknowledge it. I think in 4 years, if we have if we end up with a woman president or another black president, and that person, a scandal comes out about adultery, it'll be a huge deal. Like they won't be like, well, we gave Trump a pass, so don't worry about it. Like, it'll completely be the end of the world.
Yeah. And, okay, I'm kind of... New hypothesis. They have managed to make a political prosperity gospel. Because the prosperity gospel mostly has been a thing in Latin America and the black church. You see it quite a bit. Some in white evangelical churches, but not as much. It kind of looks like what ended up happening was... They got sucked in for moral reasons. Then they adopted the economic model and have all convinced themselves that if they keep voting Republican, they'll get rich. Mm-hmm. Just like if you keep giving the pastor money, you'll get rich.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how poor you are.
Yeah.
Or how much they screw you over. You just keep
Well,
doing
and at this point, I'm sure for a lot of them, it's like, what would you do? Change teams? Like, what are you going to move over to the Democrats and be like, wow, for a pastor like that, he's like not going to move over to, the pro-choice, trans loving side. Yeah. So you're just stuck with Trump. You're stuck because there's, the other side is...
Moderate Republicans have been screwed.
Yeah, yeah.
They got nowhere to go.
I have a friend who's a pundit who does a lot of speeches and has written several books. And when Trump was elected, he was like, don't worry about it. The machine will eat him. the machine will grind him up. And then that's what he said over the last few months is he's like, you're watching the machine take care of it. He was like, the machine is huge and it will grind someone down, good or bad. You know, he watched it do it to Obama, where by the end of it, he had a full head of white hair. It was just like, oh. And he's like, you're watching the machine grind Trump down because ultimately he's working against a lot of very intelligent people in DC who have been in here. This is a lifetime thing for them. It's not just a jaunt, you know?
Yeah.
So,
You know, Clinton, Bush, and Obama all started office with dark hair, left office completely white.
Well, it is the most stressful job in the world.
Yeah.
And they are reaching it at an age where their hair is naturally going to start turning gray.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, come on, give them a break.
I had a conversation last night. This guy, I went on a date and it's the first like cold call I've gotten. Like nobody ever asks me out. And I've gone on a couple dates with like people I've known for a long time. But this guy just asked me out at a Five Guys. Classy. He put his number on a napkin.
Nice.
And I was like, you know what, fuck it. So we went on a date. Turns out, like, he showed up. He was wearing what I'm pretty sure was a Blue Lives Matter t-shirt. And he had just come from a gun shooting competition and then had been riding dirt bikes. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. And it was fine. It wasn't like an unpleasant evening or anything. But at one point, we were sort of talking about the president, and we were talking about things. And I was like, look, I just got to ask, like, did you vote for Trump? And he's like, no, I didn't vote for anybody. I didn't like either candidate. And I was like, well, that's at least something, I suppose. And he was like, but I couldn't. He was like, how about you? And I'm like, of course I voted for the woman. Look at me. Like, we've been talking for 15 minutes. You know I voted for the woman. And he was like, well, I just don't think she was the right woman for the job. I agree that we need a woman president, but I don't think she was the right woman for the job. And I'm like, you think any fucking person who's ever been president was the right person for the job? No one who's ever been president was the right person for the job. Everybody's just somebody who has an agenda doing their thing. I was like, I wanted a woman in there. I don't care. Like, she would have to be so much worse than she is for me to not vote for a woman. He's like, don't you feel like that's sexist? Yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't care. I want a woman president. I want shit to change and that shift to happen. And he was like, oh, I never really thought about it like that. And then we had a perfectly pleasant rest of our date. But I was like, it's, you know, there's not going anywhere, obviously, but I was kind of like, I thought you were bridging the divide.
I thought you were going to say that he walked in with a "Make America Great Again" hat, and I would have been like, oh man.
You know, I wouldn't have left because that's been kind of my thing with my comedy lately. Is I feel like I have a really unique position to take people who are very extreme on either side and make them sort of like examine that. And I try really hard. Like, I do a lot of really conservative rooms.
I could just see you at the table going, challenge accepted.
Pretty much. Even when he was talking about like his position on guns and stuff, I was like, let's have a conversation about this. Nice. You know, and abortion too. We talked about abortion. Like, I'm a fun first date is my point.
Oh, I can see that.
I sit down like, what are your views on abortion? Huh? Pony up. Tell me what you got. This better be good. No.
Oh, man. Well,
that made the baby cry. I know.
Sad baby.
No, you're right. I'm going to be alone forever. It's cool. Kylie's right.
All right. Well, we are out of time, and I think Kylie's out of patience. Emma, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I am a road trip, or on Instagrams. Sleeve Hamster is my name on there.
Oh my God, the sleeve hamster. Oh, I just remembered that.
Yep. You can listen to my story about stealing hamsters when I was a teenager on YouTube. It's up there. And also, I will be at Treefort. I don't know if this will air before Treefort, but I'll be at Treefort. I'm headlining Thursday night at Liquid, and they're premiering my comedy special at the Flicks Thursday night at 5.
Nice.
So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Thursday. What's the date? Do you know? Because not everybody knows when Treefort is, like myself.
It's you know what? It's probably the 22nd, but maybe something else. But they can.
That sounds about right.
Your Treefort pass gets you. You like how I'm stalling? It's the 22nd. The Treefort pass gets you into either one of those. Or you can also buy tickets individually. So
next week.
Is that next week? Shit. Okay.
Well, this is going to be released on Tuesday.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
So for them, it'll be a week.
Oh, you made my heart start pounding.
So a week from release.
Perfect. Yeah. So come see me.
All right. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us. And listeners, remember, not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/atheistnomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads. And as our special guest today, we have Emma Watson.
Arnold.
Who's Watson?
Emma Watson is an actress who I get introduced as incredibly often, actually.
Okay, let's start that over.
Okay.
Is that Hermione?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.